the genius of marketing and the king of fake stamps. How did the owner of a printing house in Geneva persuade collectors to buy fakes? Why were postage stamps sent under the grill before? This is the famous inverted Jenny stamp. In November 2023, it was sold at auction in New York for $2 million. But the value of a 24-cent postage sticker is determined not only by its more than a century-old history. A curious incident is associated with its release. On it, the famous Curtiss JN-4 postal plane, which was nicknamed Jenny, was accidentally printed upside down. Postal workers, of course, quickly noticed this error, but a sheet of 100 copies still managed to go into circulation. Before the auction, the inverted Jenny was carefully inspected. After all, rare stamps have been attempted to be faked more than once. As early as the mid-19th century, the market for valuable postage stamps was flooded with fakes. However, initially, the fraudsters had slightly different goals. Mail was considered a very expensive service, so some cunning people carefully removed stamps from envelopes and resold them. Stamps were reused. The entire stamp was scraped off and then re-glued to another item of mail. The fight against the repeated use of stamps began immediately. A certain stamp was invented by Charles Steele, a specialist from an American banknote company. It was also called a grill. That is, it applied such a print to the stamp that the ink would eat into the stamp and it was impossible to clean it. In 1867, Charles Steele patented his invention, known today as gridge. Essentially, this grid, or as it was also called, a grill, was a design with a ribbed embossing. It was applied to stamps immediately after typographic printing. There were a total of 11 grids. Each form had a specific letter of the English alphabet. The smallest circulation included stamps with a waffle-like design in the shape of the letter Z. Only 2 copies with such a relief stamp are known. One of them, from 1868, called the Holy Grail, is now among the most expensive stamps in the world. In 1998, a printed sticker with a face value of 1 cent featuring the portrait of diplomat and first Postmaster General of the USA, Benjamin Franklin, was sold for almost $1 million. And in 2024, it went under the hammer for a price 4.5 times higher. The first stamp in the world was the penny black, featuring the profile of Queen Victoria. It was issued in May 1840 in England in a small print run. Just a year later, Dr. John Edward Gray, an employee of the British Museum, placed an advertisement in a newspaper for the purchase of the penny black. From that moment, the history of philately began. However, the term itself appeared only a quarter century later, thanks to the French collector Georges Herpin. Valuable stamps were hunted all over the world in the past and even now, and there is nothing surprising about that. In different countries, in different cities, there were their own types of stamps with unique designs. Certain collections were released for holidays, and certain collections were dedicated to famous historical figures. When people started exchanging letters, they began to like these intricate, colorful pictures. Of course, they wanted to keep them, to show their friends, and ultimately, to brag. By the end of the 19th century, fraudsters were so skillfully copying rare stamps that the fakes were virtually indistinguishable from the originals. No one knew how to act in this situation. There was no technology, and there was a shortage of specialists. However, a man was found who decided to go the opposite way, not to fight fakes, but to legalize them. His name was Henri, but in history, he remained as Louis Henri Mercier. This entrepreneur from Geneva organized the production of fake stamps on industrial scale. In 1891, Louis Henri Mercier created an entire printing house. His stamps were of high quality, and he would say that these were not fakes at all, but simply similar copies. Moreover, on some stamps, he would make notes on the back. But the mark was not always visible, and philatelists would glue these stamps into journals, and subsequently, it became impossible to distinguish a fake stamp from an original one. Copies of valuable stamps were called reprints by Louis Henri Mercier himself. And although the Swiss's fakes were valued even among specialists, the business still went bankrupt. However, the idea of the stamp forger was appreciated by another resident of Geneva. In 1903, the printing house of Louis-Henri Mercier was bought out by François Fournier. He was well versed in philately and understood the desires of collectors. Before coming to the printing house, he had managed a small stamp trading firm in Geneva City for several years. Under his leadership, the printing house began producing copies of the rarest and most valuable stamps from around the world. The assortment included stamps from English and German colonies, Austria, Switzerland, and China. The quality of these fakes was so high that even experienced experts could barely distinguish them from originals. To counterfeit Russian stamps from 1884 with denominations of 3, 5, and 7 rubles, which was a huge amount of money at the time, François Fournier even bought original stamps with wide margins around the main image. These scraps were enough to produce copies. The fakes turned out to be identical to the originals, and the key was the printing paper with special watermarks. It was by these watermarks that rare stamps were distinguished from fakes. Stamps are still a payment instrument, which means that, like banknotes, a significant number of postal stamps had watermarks applied to them. Usually, watermarks on stamps are simple symbols, such as geometric figures, letters, or even simplified coats of arms of the countries from which the stamp originated. What wasn't used before to protect stamps from counterfeiting? All kinds of foils, ceramic plates, but perhaps the greatest ingenuity was shown by printing house employees in Northwest Europe and Africa. In Iceland, volcanic ash was used in the production of stamps, and in Morocco, for example, sand grains were added. Sometimes unique materials were used, such as capron, silk, wooden boards. François Fournier was not considered a fraudster by anyone. He called things by their names. In advertisements, he always stated that he was selling copies of stamps or facsimiles. In Latin, this means to make similar. Moreover, the Swiss was a true marketing genius. He knew exactly how to make collectors buy his fakes. Fournier asserted that every philatelist should fill the empty spaces in their album by any available means, thereby appealing to the collector's pride. Fournier stated that using copies was not at all shameful, as he offered collectors to acquire his imitations as a temporary substitute until they could obtain an authentic stamp. However, some clients used François Fournier's product for shady dealings. They resold high-quality copies as originals. As a result, trust in the market for postal rarities was shaken, although the business of the king of fake stamps himself did not decline. World War I changed everything. People had no time for stamps. In 1918, Fournier died. The history of counterfeit postage stamps, of course, did not end there. This is the dream of all collectors, the Princess of Philately, or the British Guiana 1-cent magenta. The richly colored stamp with a 1-cent denomination was issued in 1856 in a single copy. In 1940, it was bought by Australian millionaire Frederick Small. Soon, rumors spread that a second copy existed. Fraudsters did not fail to take advantage of this. 25 years ago, a loud scandal was broken around one of the fakes. The forgery belonged to the hand of the forger, Peter Winter. He took a more common but similar in design 4-cent stamp from the same period. Experts recognized the forgery as brilliant. They only identified the falsification because Winter had been repeatedly caught with fakes before. And if this stamp had come from other hands, it's possible that the forgery would not have been discovered. Ultimately, experts concluded that the British Guiana 1-cent magenta is one of a kind. In 2014, it became the most expensive stamp in the world. At auction, it was purchased by the owner of a shoe factory for $9.5 million.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. And please leave a comment below. I read every single one, and your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.